All right, so we will go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Keith Spencer, and I'm one of the career experts here at FlexJobs. And FlexJobs, for those of you who don't know, has been the most trusted and leading site for remote job listings since 2007. We are thrilled to have as our guest today, Stan Miller from StoryKate, to discuss mastering your response to Tell Me About Yourself. Stan is a professional trainer and storyteller who has been helping transform the way professionals narrate their journey for years, and we are very excited to have him present this webinar with us today. Before we dive into Stan's presentation, though, I want to cover a few quick housekeeping items. This will be a 60-minute webinar that includes a presentation with Stan, followed by our audience Q&A. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be emailed out to all of you later this week. If you would like to ask a question during our Q&A, please type it into the Q&A section rather than the chat section. You can also use the thumbs up button to vote up any other questions you'd also like to hear the answer to so that we know which questions are the most popular. We likely won't be able to get to every question, but we are confident that you will learn something helpful today. And with all that said, I would like to now turn things over to Stan. Welcome, Stan, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much, Keith. Welcome, everyone. I've been looking forward to this session all week, along with preparing for a storm, Hurricane Milton. I am actually in the track for Hurricane Milton here in Florida. So I'm in Florida in the United States, getting ready for a hurricane, but wanted to be here with you all today. So thanks for having me here. It's exactly 2 p.m. Eastern time here in Orlando, and I'm excited that I have so much to cover with you today. Before I do that, I want to thank Keith, Katie, and the entire FlexJobs team for making this possible for not only me, but for you all. I've made a lot of promises, and I want you to walk away with some good information about answering the question, tell me about yourself. Now, today, I'm hopeful that you will gain a fresh perspective and have some actionable ways to improve on how you answer that question. So, here's a quick overview of today's journey. We're going to talk about big marker tips, and you're already getting that. So I see where you all are dialing in from. I see you all are already in the chat, and I love that. We will cover how storytelling is important and how stories work, especially in interviews. I'll then introduce you to a framework that you can use to answer the question, tell me about you. Most importantly, I won't just tell you how it works. I'm going to show you how it works. So this is not your normal webinar, okay? So there's going to be some interactivity here in the chat, and we'll be using the chat today. Stick around because I have a massive opportunity at the end of this call that could change the way you answer this question forever and really help you accelerate your storytelling. Now, during this presentation, I want to be connected with you and I want us locked in together. So as Keith mentioned, we're going to use the chat and QA features to achieve that. So if you haven't already put where you are dialing in from, go ahead and put where you are dialing in from. I see Seattle. Put where you are dialing in from in the chat. Let's see. Fredericksburg, Virginia. Drop where you are dialing in from. Kentucky. Okay. Let's see, Texas, Fort Worth, Colorado. Yes, people from all over, not only the US, but I see people globally in the call as well. So let's get to some of my promises. You've joined, and I'm glad to be here with you, and I want to make you some promises straight away. Number one, I want you to know that we're going to gain some clarity that you specifically need when answering the question, tell me about you. You'll learn storytelling frameworks to prepare for interviews, and I'm going to teach you how to build deep human connections today with interviews that will lead to job offers. Now, most of us prepare based on what we believe works or what we've been told that works. And that shapes the way we prepare for interviews, specifically answering the question, tell me about you. Now, when I'm speaking to candidates, executives, especially mid-career professionals, most have embraced one of these 3 preparation methods that I call the preparation trifecta. Now, today, it's possible that you are here right now and you're part of one or more of what I call the trifecta. So let's explore a few of these archetypes. First, there's the researcher. Now, researchers believe that knowledge is power. Every piece of information matters. You spend hours on the job description, company website, and aligning your skills to the job. You leave no stone unturned when it comes to information. And one thing you care deeply about is letting interviewers know that you've done your homework. So that is the researcher. The second archetype is going to be the rehearser. Now, precision and practice are your mantras if you're a rehearser. Every word matters. You've played out loads of interview questions and scenarios, and you've practiced how to answer those. You've likely tried to memorize some of your answers. Your goal is to have a solid response in your interview to every question in all scenarios, and practicing makes you feel less nervous. So you go all in on scenario prep. Now that is the rehearser. All right. Next, we've got my renegades. Now, I know there are some renegades on this call, and there are some renegades among us. You believe in the power of genuine, unscripted responses. Now, you think that you've got this, and you believe that you can handle any curveball that they can throw your way. Generally, you probably think that you can simply show up and you're highly probable to be able to sell your way into the role. Now, this is where we take a pause. So I want you to take a moment to reflect. Now, I'm going to place no judgment on your response. Which one of the trifecta most resonates closest with you? Now, it's important to know that these aren't flaws, but which number 1, 2, or 3 resonates with you? You can just type a number in, or 1, 2, or 3 is fine. Okay, I just see lots of 1s and 2s. There are a nice, healthy mix of 3s in there. I love that. I love that. You guys are just so fast. I can't even keep up with the responses. All right. So if you have more than 1, by the way, that's okay. That's okay. Now, I'm guessing that you're here on this webinar today for one of the following reasons. You've probably been told to sell yourself in interviews, but you've been looking for someone maybe to show you how to do that. Maybe you're not sure what to believe. Maybe you have some doubts on what works and what doesn't work. So maybe you've had some losses in terms of not being able to get those offers that you are aspiring to get. You might be looking for a position now or facing a pivot soon in your career. Maybe you're not ready, you don't feel ready, but you can't afford to lose. Now, most people in job search suffer from one common thing, and that's feeling alone. Job search is a lonely place, and it's easy to lose your identity when things change after you've been at one role for so many years. And these are some of the things that we focus on. We focus on, our identity. And when we work at a company for so long, that title, that name, rank, and serial number becomes our identity. And so it is tough to make a pivot after so many years, especially if you haven't interviewed. And answering the question, tell me about yourself, is a big part of that. Now, some of you have never met me before. You don't know who I am. So I'm just going to take about 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about me. I live in Orlando, Florida. You already know that. I am a girl dad. I have 2 girls. I'm married to my beautiful wife, Kyla, for 20 years. I have Naya, who is my youngest daughter, who is 17. She is a senior in high school, going to college next year. My daughter, Gabriella, is married, lives in Austin, Texas, and is in project management and recruiting. Now, a little bit about me, I left AT&T as a mid-level manager. I joined a tech startup and 3 years later became a C-level executive at a startup technology company. 3 years ago, I left all of that behind to build a professional development company called StoryKate, and we help people recognize their potential so that they can achieve greatness. We do that by teaching people storytelling. So that's just a bit about me. I showed up for you today, and I want you to show up for yourself. The truth is that I have something that's so important for you today, and now is not the time to be multitasking. So with that said, I would love to invite you to just kind of turn off your distractions. I know it's easier said than done. All of us can get into multitasking, but I want to just make that invitation to you today. I'm inviting you into an experience. And if you're distracted during this experience, you'll likely miss the gift that I'm here to present. So over the next 50 minutes or so, I'm going to share exactly what you need to do to change the way you tackle this question, tell me about you. And before we start, I have something very special to announce at the end. So stay with me. Let's get back to those promises. Before I teach you something, I'm going to ground you on a few truths. I want you to take notes. If you have the ability to take notes, pull out a pen, paper, notepad, digital device, however you take notes. And there's a specific reason for this. I want you to take notes. And these are truths. Truth number one, when interviewing, it's not what they think about you, it's how they feel about you. The number one criteria for selection is trust, not skills. There's a way to build trust, but it involves building an emotional connection. And that's important. Truth number two, remember, they or interviewers are moving forward based on who they believe you are from the information that they've read. If you get invited to an interview process, they have already said yes. They've looked at you, whether your LinkedIn profile, whether on paper, and they believe that you are the right candidate for the role. When you show up to the interview, you start from a yes. You are either going to reaffirm that yes and help them believe that you are in fact the right candidate, or things that you are going to do or say are going to convince them that they were wrong and you are not the right candidate. It's just a different way to look at things. Now, on to number three. No skill set, qualification, or achievement outweighs human connection. When all things are equal, resumes, background, everything's equal, it's who they feel most connected with and trust who gets the offer. It's who they feel most connected with and trust that gets the offer. Now, here's the interview timeline. We all step into an interview. We're just going to use an example of 60 minutes as the interview. Your goal should be to reveal information over time. So when we start an interview, they're going to ask you a version of the question, tell me about you. But here's what happens. We tend to seek to pack all the energy, all of our background at the front end of the story inside the first few minutes of the interview. So when we answer the question, tell me about you, we tend to just jam pack everything at the front end of the interview in the first 3 to 5 minutes. I want you to understand that this includes sort of releasing the highlight reel, releasing chronological history and resume regurgitation. So I know that there are some people on this call that when they answer the question, tell me about you, or hey, review your resume for me, or whatever format that comes out in an interview, you do what I call a reverse regurgitation of your resume. You're more focused on stepping them through your background. And there's a different way to do that. Okay. But you have to remember, you have an hour, 30 minutes, sometimes more than an hour to get out your full story of what your background is. And so what you're failing to realize in many cases is that you have this time, so you must learn to use it. I mean, imagine Luke Skywalker meeting Yoda. So you've got Luke Skywalker in movies meeting Yoda, completing the Jedi training, finding Darth Vader was his father, in fact, overcoming that and destroying the Death Star in less than 5 minutes. That's just impossible to achieve. And so if you're trying to pack in a 30-minute resume regurgitation into 4 minutes, you are more likely to confuse, and confusion equals losing in this case. So what does happen when we do this? And so if you're with me and you know that this happens and this has happened to you, just drop a yes in the chat. If this has happened to you in the past, if you have done resume regurgitation when answering the question, tell me about you, just drop a yes in. So I know that you are with me. Yes. So I've got a group of you that have said, yeah, I am guilty of that. Fine. All right. That confuses. Okay. If you confuse, you lose. We know that. Now, I've spent time unpacking the answer to tell me about you with hundreds of people. Most people feel the same way, and most of the stories sound very similar. And here is the typical pattern that I see. Most people feel this way when they're telling their career story. Now, I want you to look at this and I want you to evaluate it. And I want you to follow this flow chart. Now, has this been you? Have you felt like this? If it has, type the word me into the chat. If you've either been a part of an interview and your story has sounded like this, or this is how you felt, or you've interviewed someone that frankly has sounded like this is what, this is not storytelling, okay? But let me tell you what is storytelling. I see there are a lot of you in the chat that are, but they're laughing with me too, because this is kind of funny that my thing is when we tell our stories, how many of us have ever found ourselves apologizing at the end of the story because we've taken so much time? Of course. Yeah, a lot of us have done that. So that's not storytelling, but this is what is. So if I asked many of you on this call, what is a story? I'm betting that most of you would say it's telling people what happened so that they gain an understanding. Now, that's not wrong. And it does support sort of our desire to deliver chronological events. But there's a different way to think about stories, your stories in interviews. And one of the very best definitions of story that I've heard most recently was from a writer. His name is Dennis Ross, and was in a LinkedIn live session. And Dennis, when we talk about Dennis, he points out it's not telling others what happened, it's telling others what happened because of what happened. So I'll say that again. It's not telling others what happened, it's telling others what happened because of what happened. Now that gains something that's special in an interview. It's called understanding, and it reveals a deeper meaning. So I've put together some do's and don'ts for you as we warm up to this new way of changing the way we think about considering new principles in telling our story. So these are this is a list for you of do's and don'ts. Okay. Don't start with information. Do start with meaning. Do not start with information. Do start with meaning. Do not sequence in chronological order. Do sequence information that matters and that's relevant to your conversation. Don't share your story from event to event. Do share your story from effect to effect. And finally, we've got don't overshare and drown them in the details, which most of us are guilty of. Do share relevant moments, your most relevant moments. Now, good stories, the most important thing to remember is that good stories are deceptively simple in structure. And they're a sequence of information revealing what matters and what happened over time. So I want you to look at a modified story arc that I use to help people answer the question, tell me about you in interviews. Now, it's important that you know this story structure that I'm about to reveal to you is something that I use specifically for answering one question. What arguably could be the most important question at the beginning of the interview that will lead them to connect or disconnect from you. So here's the story structure. We know story is a transformation over time. It starts with a beginning and it goes to a middle and then ends in a resolution. Okay. Now, before I unpack the story arc for Tell Me About You, I want to again say that there are different patterns for different stories. This one's just for Tell Me About You. Okay. This is not a pattern that I use for answering behavioral questions. Okay. So let's start with the introduction. In the beginning of the story, there is a first chapter, followed by a defining moment and a resolution that leads into chapter 2. Now, chapter 2 is more of the same. It has a defining moment and a resolution. And then we move to chapter 3, which reveals where you are today, but is not the end of your story. Now, I want you to think of it as revealing a new desired state where you want to be next as chapter 3. This structure is simple and it goes from the beginning to middle to end, and it's done in 3 chapters. This is a very important concept. Why do we use 3 chapters? Okay. Why would we use 3 chapters? Because when we use chapters, people understand what chapters are. And let's say I'm telling you my story in 3 chapters, and I get to chapter 1, and then I move to chapter 2. You mentally know how long it's going to take me to bridge these chapters. And you're also paying attention because I'm giving you markers in the story to help you as my audience follow along. But it's not easy. We don't naturally think about our careers in chapters. So in order to do this, you've got to bucket your experiences into chapters for this even to work. And some of you have changed roles, gained new responsibilities, worked on different projects, but you have to cluster those things into groups in order for people to make sense of your information and your experiences that you are attempting to share. One of the ways that I want you to think about doing this is starting with your resume. You should pull up your resume and ask yourself a few questions as you evaluate your experiences. Number 1, what drives you to do the things that you do best? Again, what led to the changes and moves that you've made in your career? You can do this by looking at your resume and thinking about the deeper meaning of the move. It's not just moving from one role to another, it's what led to that change. Are there clear chapters, disciplines, roles, or pivots inside your resume or your career that you can look at as a chapter? So thinking about clustering these. And what happened before the final job listed on your resume? So get ready to surface some context and some things that motivated you on where you are right now. What's motivating you? Okay. And so classic 3-act structure. Julian mentioned that in the chat. You're exactly right, Julian. Classic 3-act structure with a bit of a twist. Okay. With a bit of a twist. And I'm going to show you, I'm going to kind of unpack that twist for you. So when you're done brainstorming and clustering your chapters, you'll want to frame up your intro. Now, here are the ingredients for an effective introduction. Okay. Number 1, an overarching career theme name. Yes, I know you're gonna think this might be silly. Name your story. Okay. My story is a reinvention story. There is a name for your story, and it's good that you name it because you may want to use that name in your introduction. The number and the names of each chapter. Go with 3 chapters and name each chapter. You can name it beginning, middle, end. You can name it beginning, middle, now. Better yet, beginning, middle, now. Or you can name it, in my career, it's the AT&T years. Then it's the startup world. Then it's the entrepreneurial chapter. Again, and be sure to clearly name your chapters. This gives you the mile markers that you need in your story to churn the page from chapter 1 to chapter 2. And then expectations for the journey ahead. What do you want to achieve in the future should be part of how you communicate. So expectations for the journey ahead. So at the beginning in your intro, what are you trying to achieve? All right. Now, I love, let's see here. I love we talked about show and tell, and most of the webinars you probably get in or view or jump into, you're going to see a lot of people present information, share information, and not necessarily share an experience. And I'm trying to change that with you today, because I'm not just going to tell you what to do. I'm going to show you how it's done. Okay. So here's an example of what an effective introduction may sound like. Now, I want you to imagine yourself. I want you to imagine yourself thinking about someone asking you the question, "Hey, tell me about yourself," in an interview. I like to think of my career as a reinvention story, having 3 chapters. I call chapter 1 my AT&T years with a little bit of context here. So this is a simple way to think about it. Now, this feels like a script, okay? Feels like a script. It sounds, some of you are going to say, this sounds too simple. This sounds really, really easy. But if you're up for a demo, I want to show you sort of what this sounds like in terms of a demo. If you're up for a demo and you want me to actually show you what mine may sound like, would you just type yes in the chat if you want an actual demonstration of this and how this methodology works? Okay, I got some fans of demos in the chat. This is awesome. I love all the yeses. You all love demos. Okay. And so I'm going to demo it. And so it might sound something like this. I like to think of my career as a reinvention story with 3 chapters. I call chapter 1 my exploration years, where I spent 12 years at AT&T in 7 different roles. Chapter 2 was my pivot from corporate to startup. And chapter 3 is where I am today, an entrepreneur, where I teach people the art and science of storytelling. That's how I introduce my answer to tell me about you. Okay. That's a simple, effective way to do it. And it's a way to just follow the prompts. Okay. I didn't do anything but follow the prompts there. Okay. Everybody feeling good about that? Yes. Loving it. All right. So you've got a framework here that you can use. Everything starts and finishes with frameworks with me. Okay. And so if you have a framework to use, it'll make you better. You can practice inside of a framework. All right. So that's the first part of introducing your story. But what about your story? So now we got to move to the chapters. Each one should carry a similar pattern with 4 elements. So again, I'm a big believer in frameworks. So you're going to get the framework here today. All right. So you'll want to write these down or take a screenshot if you want on your computer. Okay. The 4 things that are in each chapter are going to be motivators. This is where you reveal what you were seeking to gain in the chapter. Challenges. These are the problems you faced, the discoveries you made, and the lessons you learned. Defining moments are reflections, events that sparked a turning point that changed you. And resolutions are decisions that you made to support a move to the next chapter. Okay. Bianca, I knew you were doing a screenshot. I know how people think. Like, let me get this screenshot going. I love it. All right. So again, motivators, challenges, defining moments, and resolutions. Each of these are the ingredients to each chapter. But let's break it down even further. When you have your idea for your career chapters, let's just say you looked at your resume, you kind of have some ideas, and you're starting to form your chapters, you're going to need some language to help you deliver some of the ideas. And actually, on the delivery side to your audience, I'm going to actually give you some of my language. So I'm going to loan you some of the language that I use that help me bridge from one recipe item to the next and all the way through. So when I'm working on chapter 1, I'm going to think, okay, what are my motivators? What are my challenges? What are my defining moments? And what are my resolutions inside of chapter 1? I'm going to give you some language, but I want you to feel free to use your own. So some of the language that I might use to reveal my motivators in my chapters are going to be, my greatest desire was to do this thing. I set out to do this other thing, or I was initially drawn to this field because of this thing. Okay. So this is just me lending you some language. Language is highly important. Concise, sharp language when you're starting your stories. Very, very important. Let's move to challenges. Challenges reveal problems and lessons. So I might say, I discovered something special, or despite what I thought, this was something that happened, or I enjoyed navigating these challenges, even though they weren't easy. I enjoyed these. I enjoyed doing this because I had a real purpose or a passion for it. So this is where you're revealing some challenges that you had inside of your story. We went from motivators to challenges. Now, this is super important for everybody on this call. Defining moments showcase your resiliency and self-awareness. If you believe resiliency and self-awareness are important when you are interviewing as qualities Type yes in the chat. If you believe resiliency and self-awareness are very important in interviews, type yes in the chat. Yes, I've got many of you with me on this. Okay? So it's going to be important that you tee up your defining moments in this chapter with the turning point. You know, the turning point in my story came when this thing happened, or I began to feel like something different about what I was doing. Even let them know, maybe you can say you experienced a moment of truth, which can be a defining moment. And so these are, again, just language cues that you can use. We move on to the fourth part, the recipe, the fourth ingredient, if you will, into each chapter, which is the resolution. Resolutions are your decisions that bridged you to what's next. This in itself will prevent you from what I call and then syndrome. When you end a chapter in your career with a resolution, this is the natural page turner to the next chapter. If you decide to keep going and continuing this, I did this and then this and then this, that is not going to work and you will lose your audience. So you've got to be concise and clear about what decision you made that bridged you to the next chapter in your career. Sometimes these resolutions are in our control, and sometimes they are out of our control, and that's okay. So let's say you were laid off or affected by a reduction in force. You let them know how you forged your way forward through a resolution. Now, if you changed willingly, define your decision. Why did you change? Let them know the reason behind that decision and reveal the human side of how you make decisions. Okay. And so you've got to have a way to move from the resolution to a next chapter. All right. So in chapter one, this is kind of another way to think about a framework for chapter one. Now, I know some of you are wanting to take pictures of this, and I would say, go ahead. I'm going to leave this up for just 30 seconds so you can take a picture of it. But I want you to look at how I framed this, how I framed chapter one. Now, what you can do is you can move to put together a chapter one that makes sense to you, that reveals what your desire was at the beginning of your career, how many years you spent in that in roles pursuing that desire. What did you love during that time? What were your challenges? And so this is a frame. Okay, Jose wants another demo. All right, so if you want another demo, just type demo or something in there. Let me know. Do you want another demo? I'll be happy to kind of demo this out for you. All right, demo. I hear you in my head saying demo. I love it. Okay, so all right. So I'll give you a quick demo of how this might sound in real life. You know how it sounded as I kind of came through the intro. Now I'm going to circle back to chapter one and say, in chapter one, I had a deep desire for success and was most interested in sales. After 12 years in telecom, I learned that my love for sales was actually a love to help other people. 7 roles later with AT&T, I had moved from sales to operations to marketing and eventually in a leadership capacity. I had learned to serve, but something still wasn't right. I wasn't serving myself. Now, I remember waking up and wondering if my destiny was to be the phone guy in my family, and the answer was no. So I decided to pack up my experience and create a change, which started chapter 2 in my career, a new beginning in the startup world. All right. What do you think? Was that good? Do you feel like that was a good demo, everybody? All right, I'm seeing 100. All right. I was the phone guy. Yes, Angela, I was the phone guy in my family, and I got to the end of this resolution in chapter 1. My resolution in chapter 1 was this realization that I'm going to die the phone guy in my family. And I kept looking at the mirror like, is this what it's all about? And the answer for me was no. So that's why I packed it up. That's why I took my experience somewhere else. And again, working for AT&T, it's easy to become, for me, Earlier, I talked to you all about our identity becomes where we work in a lot of cases. Now, I had spent 12 years in telecom at AT&T. So if you didn't think everyone in my circle viewed me as the phone guy, you're definitely wrong about that, because everyone that I knew, that I had worked with, and that I had come into contact with view me as the AT&T guy. And so that's why I really think it's important for you to take these moments in your career and understand, what were you reflecting on when you moved from one place to another. Now, that can be from one role to another. It can be from from one company to another, or just a complete pivot in what you decided you wanted to do with your career. Okay. All right. Good. Yes, we're recording this webinar for those of you that are asking. All right. So now, this is the key. All you have to do with that is just repeat that for chapter 2. So I just gave you the ingredients for chapter 1. You need to use those same ingredients and just move right into chapter 2. It's simple. Just simply repeat. Okay. Now, at the end of your chapter 3, so in chapter 2 and chapter 3, you're going to have very similar formats. My recommendation, and I strongly recommend that you take note of this, your chapter 3 should be either your current job or your last position. So if you're unemployed right now, your last position. And when you work through chapter 3, you're going to finish chapter 3 with something that is very important in an interview, which is to give the power back to your interviewer. And I'm going to show you how to do this. This will spark curiosity. All right. Remember, this intro isn't you notice I'm not talking about tons of titles and jobs and awards and accolades and achievements in my story. All of that can come. All of that can come through the 1 hour, 30-minute interview. What I want to do at the very beginning is to spark curiosity. Now, you'll end chapter 3 with a bridge to open a door for them to walk through. Okay. That bridge communicates who you want to help, how, and an invitation for them to ask you questions that they care about. This is very, very non-traditional, because what happens in interviews is we talk about ourselves and then we go on and on and on and on. And we just sort of look at them waiting for some sort of verbal cue that they've got the information they need. What I want you to do is stop on purpose and ask them a question. And I'm going to show you exactly how this works. Okay. So, as I pursue what's next, I'm looking for a position that allows me to help build and develop others to make a meaningful contribution at whatever company you're in front of. Now, I'm sure you've reviewed my resume and you may have some curiosities about my roles and my experiences. So I'm excited to start unpacking those for you. Where would you like us to start? That's the demo. Okay. Now, this is how you transition. Remember, I talked about transitioning back to them. This is how you end the answer to your answer to the question, tell me about you. It's with a question back to them. You have just given them a high level picture of your career. You've given them the context. It's the opening scene to your interview. You know that they have some curiosities about your roles and your individual experiences. So ask them what those curiosities are and where they would like for you to start unpacking those for them. Okay? Appreciate you, Paul. I'm just kind of looking at the chat. Gutsy and scary, Elizabeth. Yeah. But guess what? If you learn to do this, they're going to appreciate you. I promise you that, because this will turn your interview into a conversation. And what you really want is to be in a conversation, not a one-way street, not a Q&A session. Okay. And it's up to you to figure out how to navigate that. They, at the beginning of the interview, give you the keys to the car and they say, hey, drive me where you want to go. Here, tell me about you. Here's the keys. Now you can drive that car into a ditch, or you can take them onto a highway. And the off ramp is when you ask them the question, where would you like to start? I know you've seen my resume. I know that you have some curiosities about my roles, and I thank you for having me here. But where would you like to start in terms of my actual background? Okay. Now, it's like you are guiding the interview. Yes. And for those of you on this call who have interviewed people, we all enjoy having the pressure off of the interviewer because as an interviewer, I've interviewed thousands of people. I love to interview people that kind of want to take some control in the interview and want to help guide me to what they want me to know about them. That is you doing this, becoming the GPS. Yes, Lee, becoming the GPS. Okay. Now, I think there's always going to be people who say this may not work. And it really is a gut feeling that you have to go with at the beginning of an interview. Now, if you're stepping into a very rigid approach where people are like, I'm going to give you 10 questions and that's all you're just going to answer these 10 and we're going to move on. This may not be the right approach. But for most interviews that you step into, when they ask you to tell them about you, you can certainly use your creative approach, which this is by far has worked for most of the clients that I work with. Okay. Now, on to the gift that I promised you earlier. But before I give you this gift, I want you to understand who this gift is for because it may not be for everyone on this call. All right. Um, this is for people who can hear me that say to themselves, whether aloud or in their head, that I'm not a great storyteller. You're probably saying that you lack or probably feeling like you lack confidence when you're talking about yourself. You hate selling yourself and you're trying to memorize your answers when interviewing. But you know you have good, desirable experiences and you have value to offer others, but you just can't seem to put it together. Now, this is for people on this call that are tired of being passed over. Opportunities in the market are thin, the market is competitive, and you know your depth of experience is great, but you don't quite know how to communicate and create a competitive advantage for yourself when you are interviewing. If that's you, this gift is for you. But there are some people on this call that I know are on a mission. You're looking for no fluff resources. You want real learnings. You're tired of doom scrolling on LinkedIn and getting to trainings that aren't really teaching you what you need to know. And you want to put things into practice. So this is for people who really want to look at something and want to participate in an experience and really put something into practice. So this is for you. Okay. So if you are the way I see it, it's pretty simple from my lens. Okay. You have two options. Option one is you can keep going at this thing alone. You'll show up to your interviews. You'll spend hours prepping and rehearsing and memorizing. And you'll hope that you kind of figure this thing out and you'll get where you want to go and get a job offer. Okay. Get to the next level or get from unemployed to employed, wherever you are in the journey. Number two is you decide right now to find the right help you need to get better at the number one skill that influences outcomes in interviews, which is storytelling. Not debatable. The number one skill that influences outcomes in interviews is your ability to communicate your value through story. Okay. Now, if you're a number two, here's what I want you to do for me. I want you to drop 2 in the chat. I want you just to drop a number 2 in the chat. Okay. If you're a number 2, I want you're ready. Okay. You're ready for some help. You want some help. You desire some help. You need some help. Okay. That's you. I see a lot of number 2s in this room. Now, I have no idea how many of you are in this room because it does not give me a number as I'm presenting, but there are, I'm guessing probably thousands or 1,000 of you in this room, right? I see a bunch of 2s. That's great. Now, if you're a number 2, here's your chance to start changing everything. Now that I've got a roadmap for you, I've presented you with this roadmap for Tell Me About You. You'll need a framework to help you answer those questions we talked about earlier about your background, your expertise, and your experiences. So for the first time ever, I've compiled a 22-minute storytelling training. Now, this is normally reserved for my clients that I'm giving you for free. All right. This training is the exact framework that I use to help people tell their background stories in interviews. And I've used it to help hundreds of people get jobs. Okay. And today, this is yours for absolutely free. Okay. And what I want you to do is I want you to pull out your phone. If you're a number two, I want you to pull out your phone and I want you to scan this code. Okay. I want you to scan this code. Now, you will get a 22-minute training and a bonus worksheet from me. Okay. All you have to do is simply pull your phone out, scan this code. You'll give me some information so I can get you the resources. Of course, name and email, first name and email is fine. We'll get you the resources you need. You'll be directed to the page with the video, but don't worry, you'll get an email that is your backup copy. Okay. So this is specifically for you. Now, if you don't have a smartphone, let's say you've never done QR coding before, I'm going to ask Keith to drop the link inside of the public chat. So Keith just dropped the link right now into the public chat. That is the link. There's a link at the top of the chat as well. Thank you for pointing that out, Jennifer. All right. So perfect. Now you've got an opportunity to get yourself settled. You get a training from me, and we've actually started a relationship, which I think is wonderful. And I'm so grateful to have you in my network. JB says, are you going to get some spam mail from me? JB, you will get some information from me. I hope you don't consider it spam, but you will not be inundated with offers from me. You will get opportunities periodically about career storytelling and how you might work with me in the future. But make no mistake, you can happily unsubscribe or opt out of those notifications. This is simply a gift that I want you to have that's going to help you get better at storytelling. Okay. And so I hope this makes you happy. I hope you feel that this is helpful to you. And I'm looking forward to just being in connection with you. Okay. So now the next thing we want to do in this call is go to questions. So Keith, I'd love to invite you back on the call. I don't know if we have any questions. I'm not looking at them. So if we have some, I would love to take some, and we have 15 minutes or 12 or so, 13 minutes or so.
Roughly. Yeah.
Roughly. But thanks, Keith. And appreciate you having me on this call.
No, thank you for being here, Stan. We really appreciate it. Love the advice and guidance you give. Saw a lot of positive feedback in the chat, so our attendees are enjoying it as well. We do, in fact, have quite a few questions, so let's go ahead and get rolling here.
Yeah.
So our first question with the most number of upvotes says, how long should the tell me about yourself sort of elevator pitch be? Like, what's the appropriate length?
Yeah. So I want you to think about in the interview setting, it should be about 3 to 4 minutes max. Okay. 3 to 4 minutes max. And again, remember, you're not, if this is you and you're preparing, you're not giving them a debrief of every job. You're not giving them a debrief on your accolades, awards, and achievements. You're really giving them the context to understand where you've been and how you've made some decisions in your life. Like, imagine being able to tell your interviewer, this is how I make decisions. They need to know this information about you. You're just giving it to them up front. Okay.
So that kind of ties in a little bit to our next question, Stan. This person is asking, what is the interviewer kind of listening for when question or when you're responding to that question? What's kind of the purpose behind it?
Okay, so let's dig deep into, I love this question, Keith. Let's dig deep into storytelling. In story, there are two parts, a storyteller and a story listener. So if you ask that question, here's my answer. You are the storyteller. Your objective is simply to actually communicate your experiences to the story listener. The story listener is your interviewer. They are trying to make sense of what you are saying. Okay. So part of this goal here is just to have them understand and make sense of where you've been in your career and your life. And a lot of times we say so much and we just dump so much out. We get so deep, Keith, into the weeds that we simply confuse them. So keeping it simple inside of a framework, I think is your best opportunity to really help them make meaning of what you are saying.
So you're aiming for clarity, conciseness, and relevance. Is that a good way to summarize?
You're exactly right. You're
Wonderful.
exactly
Awesome.
right. Absolutely.
Okay, so our next question here, this person is asking, how do you tell your story as an older applicant without taking, 2 hours? Do you only work with the last 10 to 15 years shown on your resume? What are your thoughts there?
If you ask this question, thank you so much. I love this question. This question is so important because a lot of us have 20, 30 years of experience. And this presents a mental challenge for us as we thinking about where do I start? Ageism is real. And I'm going to date myself if I go back 30 years. You, as the storyteller, can start your story wherever you desire. You have creative liberty. If you think my story, chapter 1 is AT&T, you all know that. Do you think AT&T was my first job? It wasn't. I had 4 jobs before AT&T, but my story suggests that AT&T was my first job. So I can, as a storyteller, take creative liberty and freedom to start my story wherever I'd like. And that can shave off some years. It can, you can start it at a significant point in your career, maybe where you really had the clarity that what you wanted to do, where your formative years, the years that you shaped your career. I would just play with it and just enjoy it and have fun with it.
Awesome. Let's see. So our next one here, how do I explain gaps on my resume when I'm answering this question? Tell me about yourself. This
Mhm,
person shared that they were laid off more than a year ago and
mhm.
they're still job hunting for a permanent role. How do they kind of make those gaps into a positive part of their journey or their story?
Yeah, and so in chapter 3, you've got to talk about the things that you've been investing in and where you've been spending time, developing yourself that last year.
Mhm.
Okay. And so when we are presenting ourselves and say, if I've been laid off and maybe I've been on a comeback for a year, what have I been doing? How have I been spending my time other than applying for jobs? Have I been volunteering, investing in things that I'm passionate about? Clearly, I haven't sat in front of a computer for all of those every day for a year. So, what has been some of the themes that you want to reveal to your audience that you've been focused on over the last year? And of course, the longer you are unemployed, I certainly understand that your confidence can be shaken. But having that story and really focusing on telling that story in a way that resonates with you first will help you gain some of that confidence back. When you get laid off, I know it feels like a punch in the gut. I have been laid off, by the way, and it does feel like a punch. It did feel like a punch in the gut for me. And early in my career, I was laid off, and it took me a year, almost a year, to really make a significant comeback. But how you define that year, how do you talk about that year? Are you spending time with your family? Are you volunteering? All of those things count. And so try to be as human as you can.
No, I really appreciate that answer. We get a lot of questions about career breaks, so I imagine that that's probably relevant to a lot of folks. So thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Yeah. So our next one here, definitely kind of a tricky question. So
Mhm,
they picked out sort of one of your quotes from your presentation where you said, "No skill set, qualification, or achievement outweighs human connection."
mhm.
And then they're asking, how can someone who is maybe struggling with some of the challenges of things like ADHD or autism, how do they overcome that hurdle to create that human interaction?
Yeah, I mean, look, you have to operate within your own self in this. And I'm not an expert in ADHD or autism, or would never give you advice on what to do in those cases because I'm not qualified to do that. What I
Sure.
can tell you is seek advice and seek help with people, coaches, professionals that can help you get to where you would like to be in terms of your level of communication. When I said what I said earlier in the call, and Keith, it was, no set of skills, no qualifications, no achievements will beat human connection. What I meant by that, just to qualify it, is if all things are the same inside of a story, if Keith and I are competing for a job and we have very similar skill sets, um, we they're likely to pick the person that they feel most connected to and that they trust and who they envision themselves working with.
Yeah.
And that's really what it boils down to. A lot of times we will lose opportunities because they can't envision themselves working with us.
Mhm.
Now, the best way to showcase how you will likely behave is to talk about experiences inside your interview where you have worked and helped other people. And
Mhm.
that's exactly what that 22-minute training is going to cover, Keith. So that's a great segue.
Yeah. Well said, Stan. And I also would want to emphasize, like, I really appreciate your point about, reaching out to other resources. Things like the job accommodation network can be great with determining, how
That's
to
right.
disclose, what to disclose, other supportive resources like that. So yeah, thank you
Sure.
for that.
Yeah.
Okay, so our next one here. So this person is saying, when or how do you identify if the person asking, "Tell me about yourself," is intended to disclose more of your, kind of your life story, sort of personally, rather than the straight kind of professional answer? How do you find that balance or that dividing line between personal and professional when telling your story?
Yeah, I think that you should know in your gut when it is too personal, right? You should know that there are things that are about you and your personal life that you shouldn't necessarily want to reveal.
Sure.
We call it a career story for a reason. It's mainly about your career. But when you're dealing with life, like there are things and life events that happen inside your career that cause you to make changes. You have to look at those, you have to audit those, and you have to decide, is there a message that's going to resonate with someone? A lot of people that I work with are shy or tend to not want to talk about the valleys in their career, like the layoffs, and they sort of want to paint this beautiful picture. The person you're sitting in front of knows that careers aren't perfect and careers aren't beautiful. Okay. And most of us had ups and downs and peaks and valleys in our career. Now, when you get a valley, like a valley moment can be a layoff, Keith, for instance, and that
Sure.
valley moment actually can be a tool to connect with your interviewer, because if they've experienced a layoff, you can come into common ground by saying, yeah, my company unexpectedly had a reduction in force, and I
Mhm.
was impacted by that. But along with 50 of my colleagues, we were all impacted, and that caused me to think differently about my career. So that you could turn those things into a defining moment.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that you have to go operate within yourself. I will never tell someone, don't get personal inside of an interview. But what I will say is that your personal details, you have to stay within yourself and what you're comfortable sharing. And
Yeah.
what you feel is off limits, and you should go with your gut on that for sure.
Well said. Yeah. All right, this next one, Stan, it really resonates with me because I definitely have struggled in the past, and I'm sure I will in the future with some of that
Mhm.
interview anxiety. But this
Yeah.
person shared, they tend to become very nervous. How do they overcome that in an interview and let their true self shine?
Yeah, I mean that is a big issue. And what one of the things that can make it worse. Let's talk about, like, before we talk about solving it, let's talk about what makes it worse.
Mhm.
Is obsessing about 400 questions that you think you might get and memorizing answers. Because the
Yeah,
minute you get a question that you're not prepared for, you're off track and you are like it's like being sideswiped. It's like being in a ditch and you can't get out of the ditch. So operating in terms of, preparing the best way that you know how. And we have this thing in storytelling where it's memorizing or it's remembering. I lean on remembering. So what are the things that you remember in your career that were significant? Try to pull moments from your career that you remember, not necessarily memorizing answers. That adds to the level of anxiety. The other thing is just preparing and sharing stories, understanding frameworks, starting to think like a storyteller. Now, by the way, this doesn't happen overnight. It takes me, and one of my programs that I operate in, Keith, I have a 6-month program that I work with people,
mm,
that I'm working with people for 6 months to get them to start thinking like a storyteller. This
yeah,
is people with this idea that people are natural born storytellers. It's, in my opinion, humble opinion, That's just false. Most of the people that you appreciate right now that are great storytellers started somewhere, and that's not where they are today. Right. So, all the TEDx speakers and all those speakers that we follow, I'm telling you, they've all started somewhere, and those videos exist on the internet. So go look them up and you'll see, oh, this person is really this person. Wow. It takes practice.
Yep. No, absolutely. I agree with that for certain. Okay, so we'll squeeze one more question in here, Stan, if that's okay.
Yes.
I saw, so this question and a similar question, actually, more about kind of telling stories in written form. This person is kind of asking, does this same framework sort of work for the about section on their LinkedIn? And then that other question that I saw that I was referencing, they were asking about a cover letter. So, telling stories in written form, how does that work?
Yeah, so I think this can be a guide for both of those things. I wouldn't say verbatim, verbal communication, written communication, two different skill sets.
Mhm.
So I would take this, write it down. Remember, you don't have to memorize it, but write it down. And then you think about, okay, how would this make sense to put in my about me? Are there elements of this that would make sense to put inside of my cover letter? Sometimes cover letters are really meant for heavy skills, intentionality, persuasion. So you can certainly use this as a guide. So I would say that would be my best piece of advice there. And for those of you that are on this call that are looking for next steps, the next steps, because I'm seeing the chat here, the next steps with me would be to just watch that training, and you're going to get an email from me, and I'm going to ask you if you enjoyed it and what you thought. I'm going to ask you a few questions in the email, but just do be in touch with me and connect with me on LinkedIn, and we can stay in touch for sure.
Awesome. Well, we really appreciate having you here today, Stan. This has been fantastic information. Thank you for all our attendees. As a reminder, you will get a recording of this webinar. But thank you once again, Stan. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thanks, Keith, and thank you for you, and thank you to you and your entire team. Appreciate it. Take care,
Wonderful.
everybody.
Take care.